And welcome to our show, The Psychology of Salah, where we are looking more deeply at the spiritual and psychological aspects of our Salah in order to be able to understand it more deeply and appreciate it more when we do get onto the Masalla, the Janamaz, inshallah, in order to reach our Lord, in order to seek that nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, my guest is Brother Ghulam Abbas Laka, and he is going to be talking us through, inshallah, today, the aspects of Wudhu. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate. By the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have the opportunity to think about some of the practical aspects of the psychological benefits we can glean from Salah. And there are two aspects of this. Firstly, in terms of the psychological challenges we're facing, and secondly, some of the steps in the journey of Salah that we can use, and how we can maybe change the benefit and the value we get from what we are already doing. This is not about adding more burden to anyone. This is about increasing the benefit from what is already being done. And we build upon our previous discussions, how the Holy Quran, for instance, in Surah Ma'un, warns for Waylun lil Musallin, woe upon those who pray, and then it goes on to clarify, those who are heedless in their prayers. And this is not from a sort of vengeful retribution point of view of Allah. No, far from it. This is from His compassion. And from His love, He's saying, woe to you, because you're not benefiting from what has been given to you. So, how can we use Salah, and for what can we use Salah? Well, there are many things. The first is, if we look at the challenges we face today in the 21st century, stress has become so prevalent that stress-related and stress-induced mental health challenges are becoming really quite widespread. And we're also noticing this at a younger and younger age. As a result, the way we teach Salah and the way we practice Salah needs to change. Because this is a tool that we can use, I believe, quite practically for helping with our stress management. And in terms of why we might want to think about doing that, well, if we look at what research is showing us, scientific research now on the effects of stress, it's well known that stress can be damaging for us. But what is interesting is that when you encounter stress, but you believe that you are able to handle it, then you don't necessarily get the same negative health effects that you would expect otherwise. So without these kind of positive reinforcements, these positive thoughts about our capability, our ability to be able to manage them properly, quite a few bad things happen. So our immunity gets reduced. There are many studies which show, for instance, that the common cold strikes more severely for people who are stressed. In a study in Sweden regarding stress in the workplace, found that those who had higher levels of stress were 5.5 times more likely to get cancer, and in particular, colon cancer. Right. Yet, those who have a healthy approach to managing their stress had better immune function. And also, when they looked at people who had lived healthy lives up to 100 and above, so centurions, one of the common tools that they all had, one of the common skills rather that they all had, was the ability to manage stress in their lives. So stress is not something that we should be frightened about. Everybody has stress of different kinds: emotional, physical, financial, mental, indeed spiritual as well. It's not something that we can avoid as human beings, but we do need to be skillful at how we manage it. And I believe salah is a way in which we can manage our stress, provided we use it appropriately. Well, the first question is, can or indeed should salah be used as a tool for stress management? Or is it only for very formal worship of Allah as a distant Lord, to be lauded and worshipped from afar? Or is salah a tool that can be used throughout our day? Maybe that's why we have been required to do it 5 times a day through the day. Maybe it's a tool that we can use to strengthen us, like a crutch, to support us through our day to be more effective. Well, when we look at the Holy Quran, Surah Baqarah, Surah 2, verse 153, for instance, says, "O you who have believed, seek help for the challenges you face through patience and prayer. Astayinu bis-sabri was-salawati." So, seek help for what you are facing with patience. And sabr here is not just about a passive sense of patience, that, oh, whatever bad thing happens to me, it's okay, I'll bear it. No. Sabr has a dynamic aspect to it, of acknowledging, of dealing with, of managing, but managing with perseverance in a positive way, rather than being defeated by the challenge we're facing. And also it goes on to say, so with sabr, was salawati, and with your worship, with your prayers. Why? In Allah ma sabirin, that Allah is with those who are patient, who persevere with their values, with their principles, and with their spiritual practice. So this idea of the sabirin, who are those who are the patient ones, this word sabr has aspects of perseverance to it, not just a passive form of patience. And it's this active, dynamic aspect of sabr that I think has profound psychological value, because it allows us to look at our stresses from afar. So rather than it just consuming me, I can step back and be cognizant of my cognition. There's a metacognition here. To think about my thinking, that to look at myself and say, actually, I'm feeling stressed. And to take that aside and say, what is it that is stressing me? And how? And what are the effects upon me? Physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And when we look at our spiritual masters who have demonstrated great skill in using salah, of course, we turn to the foremost, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi alayhi. For it is narrated in Al-Kafi that he said that whenever he had a worrying or a difficult situation, what today we might translate as stress, he would retreat to prayer, and he would recite this verse that we just looked at, Surah Baqarah, verse 153. And in that regard, it shows us that maybe salah has multiple functions. And maybe it has purpose well beyond the purely legal aspect in which we normally say it. So it's normally taught to young people as one of your obligations. But what if we taught salah as one of the gifts that you are given? But do take it. It's a special gift that is given 5 times a day. But make sure you avail yourself of it. That will change the way we think about it, potentially. And that takes me to thinking about the very first step of our salah. So all our preceding discussions are about engaging with salah in its entirety as a concept. But now we start looking at each individual step. So if we begin with the ablution, the physical purification of ourselves in readiness for the encounter. When you have an important meeting, probably going to shower, get ready, be clean. And we are recommended to do the same with our salah. There are rules about how to clean. So we've got rules about ghusl and wudhu. So the steps of wudhu. And when we look at texts of mysticism and spiritual insights, such as Salat al-Arifin by Ayatollah Khomeini, he uses analogies such as when a person does wudu, to notice the relationship between your own individual ego and the infinite that you are having an encounter with, as being like that drop of water. So when you put water on your face, you're saying that as one of those drops falls into the pool of water and is merged in that pool, losing its identity, its concerns, its worries, its fears, its history and its future, it becomes dissolved, unified in the whole of the pool. And he says that when we do wudu and we notice that water dropping from our face into the pool, because of course in the early days there weren't running taps of water, people did wudu from a bowl, from a pool. But the idea was to be conscious, to use that process of washing our face as being a reminder of the mindfulness that is required. A reminder of what that salah is about, of what that union that we're about to experience is about. Just like that drop merges in union with the rest of the water in the pool, that wudu reminds us of what our salah should be like. And as we look at that water with which we're doing wudu, that in itself becomes a sign for us to wake us up from the autopilot that we might be running through our day with. Perhaps running the videotape of our ruminations, of our thoughts, our concerns, our fears, our anxieties about the future, about our concerns relating to the past. Just that physicality of feeling the water should break those shackles of rumination by bringing us into the present moment. Why? Well, when we look at the Holy Quran, Surah Furqan, Surah 25, verses 48 and 49, sends some quite powerful messages about this. It says, and it is He who sends the winds and good tidings as His mercy, and we send down from the sky pure water, ma'an tahura. And why? It says that we may bring life thereby to the dead land and give it as a drink to those we created, and numerous forms of creation. When I sometimes approach wudu after a busy day, my heart is dead. It is consumed by stresses, worries, and strains. There is no life in it. And that water, that ma'an tahura with which we do that wudu, should be a reminder to awaken the heart that actually this is a grace. And just as I have this grace, maybe I will also have the grace of being able to deal appropriately at the appropriate time with whatever has been worrying me. But at this time, the appropriate action and the appropriate mental state is to be cognizant of this water and what it represents. So just that first touch of the first water, of the first step of wudu, should be enough to connect us for the remainder of all the steps to come. The washing of the face, the hands, the feet, the head, all of that is preconditioned and facilitated in some sense by our touch, the first touch of that water. And to recognize the grace that it represents. Surah Anfal, Surah 8, verse 11, expands upon this. It says, and we sent down upon you from the sky rain by which to purify you, which is the function of wudu, and to remove from you the evil suggestions of shaitan. Well, that raises a question. How does water remove the evil suggestions of shaitan?
Interesting.
Well, this is a psychology question. One of the aspects of this that strike me is that when we are truly in contact with that water at the time of wudu, we are freed in that moment of presence, in that taste of mindfulness. We are freed from the shaitan within, the doubts that plague us, particularly with regard to our self-worth. So often we feel that, oh, I know theoretically it is possible to reach a high level in your salah, to have a spiritual ascension. But when I enter the lift, I can't press the high levels. I don't rise very high. I get off where I got on. I get on the ground floor and I get off where I got on. We don't allow ourselves to press the really high buttons, even though the buttons are there. We can choose how high we go in that spiritual elevator. But one of the reasons we don't allow ourselves is precisely because of what this verse is talking about. This verse, Surah 8, verse 11, talking about how water serves as a vehicle to free us from the whisperings of shaitan. These are the doubts we put in as obstacles to ourselves from experiencing the sweetness of salah, because we may feel we're not worthy. We may feel that because of our mistakes of the past, or because of our inability, we cannot experience the higher levels of what is available from the experience, from the opportunity. Yet, when we look at the teachings, we find that the banquet of salah is open to all. You can partake in whatever you want, to whatever extent that you want. We are the only ones who place restrictions upon ourselves. How woeful, therefore, would be the state of an individual who goes to the most sublime of banquets in a state of fasting and doesn't allow themselves to benefit from that. This could be one of the aspects of the verse we looked at for Waylun lil Musallin, woe upon those who pray, because they are withholding from themselves through their heedlessness that we see in the subsequent verse from what is available, because we block ourselves. And this is really a metaphor for many other areas of our lives, that the limitations, the false limitations we put upon ourselves through limits, through low self-worth, through self-esteem issues, that then manifest in some cases in terms of a clinical diagnosis of depression, or of various other conditions. We can catch these very early on. Indeed, we can be mindful of them 5 times a day, so that when we do that wudhu, we experience the grace that we are benefiting from already, regardless of what we may have done in the past and how limited we think our ability may be. Regardless of that, the grace that we are experiencing is unconditional upon that. So it doesn't matter who I am or what I have done. The grace of that connection through water is not something I have achieved. And it is not something I can ever deserve. It is, and always has been, and will remain, a grace. And that frees us from that mental burden we carry about our own sense of our limitations. This is where wudhu can really be so empowering. And perhaps this is why we see in, for example, Allama Majlis's book on hadith, a teaching from the Holy Prophet, peace upon him and his holy progeny, Rasulullah saying that ablution, that wudhu is half of faith. That's a remarkable statement.
Yeah.
How can wudhu be half of faith when it takes just a few moments? What is it about our experience of those few moments that can deepen our faith to such an extent? I would argue that wudhu therefore has to be an invitation to tawheed, to tasting the connection of oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we've got to be mindfully present. In order for that drop to merge into the pool of water, we have to make sure that we are truly there to witness when the drop touches the rest of the pool, and to recognize the reality of what is happening in that moment.
I was, again, thinking about, yes, doing wudu, how just as salah can be different, wudu can be different as well. And I think a way of appreciating wudu is to think about living in such a way that you never do wudu. Think about cultures where they don't do ablution. In many religious cultures, they do ablution before prayer. But of course, you know, in very secularized cultures, people are not doing ablution. It's not something that they do. And again, to people who aren't used to it, it can look very alien and sort of, what are you doing that for? Why are you washing? Which, again, I've had questions asked to me. You know, what are you doing that for? But yeah, I mean, there are so many aspects for it. The switching from, it's kind of like the switching from the kind of daily life into the sacred moment. So it's that kind of preparation for the sacred moment. And it gives you that time to mentally prepare to get onto the musalla. And also, I'm sure other people have noticed as well, that of course, your experience of it is different according to the climate and the weather, and whether you're fasting. And sometimes you really appreciate it when you're fasting. It's hot, like we've been fasting in the summertime. You can't drink, but that wudu is, you just appreciate it so much.
The wudu during the month of Ramadan brings out the fasting of the mind, the fasting of the tongue, the fasting of the heart, the fasting of the spirit, all the other forms of imsak, of withholding that we do, in addition to withholding from food and water during the day. And at this point, I think it's worth going a little deeper into the why of it. Why do we bother with this practice of wudu? And not just for salah. Of course, we're told to be in a state of wudu throughout the day. Yeah. And the benefit of that, well, the Holy Prophet, peace upon him and his holy progeny, has also said that when a Muslim performs ablution, mistakes committed by his or her hearing, sight, hands, feet, leave this person, so that when the person sits in preparation for salah, he or she is forgiven. That's the power of it. In another hadith, it says that when a person performs wudu, performs ablution, his or her sins shed away from him or her, just like the leaves shed from a tree. That's the kind of cleansing that is available to us. So why might that be? Let's go into the steps of wudu in a bit more detail. So we begin with niyyah, with the intention that I am doing this wudu for a purpose, for a specific purpose. So it's not just heedless, mindless, so it's not part of that sahun idea from sort of Ma'un, of being heedless, that we just get on with it. We turn the taps on and do the wudu and rush on to the prayer mat. No, that niyyah to do wudu is a niyyah to purify ourselves in preparation for the connection. And as we wash our face, we bring to mind what we see and how we see, the eyes with which we see. Not just vision being a grace, but deeper than that. We think about the cognition of that. So do I see the positive or do I see the negative? And how may I improve the extent to which I see the positive that is available, that is accessible to me? And when I wipe my face and I touch my mouth, and indeed is a preceding step when we gargle, when we wash our mouth, the mindfulness aspect of that is to recognize, particularly when you're fasting, for example, in the fasting of the tongue. So recognizing how we relate to other people and what we say to them when we're with them and about them when we're not with them. All the notions of backbiting and riba. So that simple act in wudu actually becomes a moment of self-reckoning. And this audit of who we are and what we do is a feature that runs throughout Salah. And it begins with the wudu. As we go through each of the body parts, our face, our hands, our feet, our head, really highlights the process by which we are watching our behaviors. So there's a behavioral aspect to the psychology of wudu, as well as a cognitive aspect to the psychology of wudu. So as we become more aware of what we are doing, we then turn to washing our right hand, and the actions, the positive actions we are doing, our positive behaviors that we want to reinforce, and washing our left hand, illustrating maybe some of the negative things that we do that are unhelpful to ourselves and people around us, to move forward from that. Maybe, if I'm doing wudu for the afternoon prayer, what I may have done just that morning that may have been unhelpful, or what I may have said that may have been unkind, both to others and to myself. We see in Dua Kumail, Imam Ali guides us with the verse, ظَلَمْتُ نَفْسِي, I have been a tyrant upon myself. So what have I said in terms of my thinking about myself? Have I said that I'm not good enough to experience Salah? I'm not good enough to aim for that promotion? I'm not good enough to do what inspires me? What have I been saying to myself, about myself? And what have I been saying to other people? And then in terms of, as we do massa, as we wipe our head, that is a clear point. What is the point of massa? It's not to wash our head in that sense, because we can do that with shampoo in a shower. Wudu is different. The point about that massa, just wiping our head, is momentary. But we bring to our consciousness, our thinking, particularly where we touch this part of our head, our frontal lobe, the cognitive part of our modern neuroscience tells us about all the cognitive functions, the executive functions that happen in the prefrontal cortex. That's the area that we are touching with massa. We are reminding ourselves of the how we engage in cognition, how we are thinking, which reminds us to think about what we are thinking about. What is it that I'm doing with this incredible faculty of mind? Am I using it for my benefit, or am I abusing it for the detriment of others and myself? Yeah. So by the time you finish your wudu, you've actually gone through the entirety of your cognition and your behavior, because when you wipe your feet, you're also thinking about where you go and what you do. It's about connecting with our bodies. What am I doing with all aspects of my being? So it's really a mini audit of all our cognitive aspects in terms of our thinking, as well as all our behaviors from all aspects of our body, including our speech and our hearing and our sight. But there's also a promise here as well. It's not just about taking stock in a negative sense. It's very much about positive empowerment, because we've got particular du'as, particular psalms, invocations to be recited at each point in that du'a, encouraging us to move forward. It's about a motivation to develop each aspect of our being. So that when we actually look at the relationship between wudu and therapies for mental health, such as cognitive behavior therapy or mindfulness-based therapies, we see that many of the aspects of psychotherapy are reflected just in the wudu aspect of salah, let alone all the other elements that inshallah we'll look at, time permitting. But just to conclude on this, when we think about wudu, we mustn't just think of it as an action we do in order to have the connection with Allah in salah. No. Wudu creates the opportunity straight away to be in that state of connection at the outset, so that everything that happens thereafter is already in that state.
And of course, that's also the time when you are making an intention, even if you haven't made the niyyah for the number of raka'at, when you're on the prayer mat, but because you are, focusing on that water and focusing on the process, the formal process, you are already kind of drawing your attention, kind of, if you had scattered attention before, it's becoming focused. And in some sense, the water does help with that focus and that stillness as well, because I believe wudu is also recommended if you're angry or upset.
Yes.
So it's
even
a kind of a
tayammum.
calming...
Just if you don't have water,
Right.
there's something natural. It's the sand.
Right. So it's that kind of calming, rebalancing, refocusing, before. Because again, I think if we did do salah without wudu, it would literally mean you were just in the middle of doing something, I'll quickly get on, the janamaz and then quickly finish. And there wouldn't be that, again, that facility for enabling you to focus and perfect your intention, I guess.
And the intention to step towards our prayer mat, that movement is highly symbolic. Those steps we take from wherever we've done wudu to wherever we're going to pray, that movement is a metaphor for our spiritual movement, of our movement in our lives, of our unfolding as what it means to be a human being. That unfolding is a step-by-step unfolding, so that as we have washed our feet to engage in those steps, it changes.
Ahlul Bayt TV, the holy household for every household.